Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, former immigration lawyer turned entrepreneur. I'm the co-founder of Laborless, an immigration software company that automates H-1B compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, a marketing agency for the immigration and mobility industry, which, of course, brings you this show. Today is a really special episode. I've been wanting to do this episode for a long time and this whole series for a long time. Today's episode 104, but importantly, it is the third installation of our M&A series where we talk to companies in the immigration, specifically immigration tech industry that have gone through a merger or an acquisition. So today we actually have two guests that have both been on the show separately, which is amazing because we got to see the growth of both of their companies from those days, and then now they've joined forces. So we have Xiao Wang, the CEO of Boundless, and Romish Badani, the CEO and founder of Bridge Immigration. And we're going to be talking about how Bridge has been acquired by Boundless, how that happened last year. It's a really exciting episode. This was big news in the immigration space, and I'm so grateful to both of these guys for coming on and sharing the story and talking about sort of, how this happened, what we can learn from it, what we can expect going forward. Before we jump into the episode, I do want to give a quick thank you to the main sponsor of this episode, Lex Reception. So, for listeners who've been here, you've heard me talk about them. But if you haven't, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service. They provide they answer phone calls, they answer messages and emails in real time. They schedule appointments. They basically are a reception service for your law firm with expertise in the legal industry. So if somebody reaches out to you and maybe you're out of the office, it's the weekend, it's late night, Lex Reception can help you respond to those inquiries and not lose that potential client to somebody who does respond and instead sign up with them, get them scheduled, etc. They can also proactively reach out to clients for you if you have a list or you've had some folks that have filled out a form on your website, etc. So there kind of can be a business development arm for you as well. They integrate with various tools, Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and others that immigration law firms use. And for listeners of the show, they are offering $250 off your first month of service with them. So there's a link in the show notes. Click on it or reach out to Lex Reception at lexreception.com and tell them you heard about them on the GMI Rocket Show. Okay. Very excited. Without any further ado, Xiao, Romish, thank you guys so much for being here. I'm so excited for this. And actually, before we even get started, we've got two comments already. Josh Shacknow saying, "Happy Friday, gents. Excited for this talk." Thank you, Josh. He's from Canada. And Ian Hawes from Amy Translate saying, "This is going to be a good one. Excited to tune in. Happy Friday." So thank you both. And thank you guys again for being here.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So because it's, first of all, to the listeners, I'll say, if you don't know, Xiao Romish's story, please go back to go to the GMI Rocket Show YouTube channel, Facebook, the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and listen to the episodes about how both of you guys started your companies. They're both amazing stories, amazing episodes. We're not going to dive into that level of detail, but I definitely would love to get just a little bit of background, on both of you, and just a little bit of the kind of mini version of how you both started your companies separately. Quick summary for folks who haven't been here. So Romish, I'll start with you. Talk a little bit about, if you can, kind of your journey getting into the immigration space, and then sort of how that culminated into launching Bridge.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for having us, Roman. My journey, like many of us, has been windy. I joke that I'm a bit of like an immigration startup dinosaur, having been in this space for over a decade now. My background professionally was in the financial services industry. So I started kind of a classic finance background, started as an investment banker. I was a private equity investor after that, and then went to business school hoping to really restart and build something from the ground up, but had no idea what that looked like. Was interested in being an entrepreneur, but stumbled really into the immigration space. I'm the son of immigrants, but haven't been through the process myself. Experienced it from the sidelines through my family's journey, and wasn't an immigration practitioner either. And so met Forrest, my co-founder and CTO, in Boston. And we set out on a journey during my second year of business school to really try to solve problems in the legal space. And that first problem we tried to tackle was helping folks connect to immigration attorneys in a more efficient and transparent way. So we started consumer. We then ended up a couple of years in, pivoting to being a B2B company, raised a little bit of capital early on, got profitable fairly quickly. And that set off our journey at Bridge to being a B2B immigration solution for companies of all sizes. So we'll get into more of the story of how that evolved and how we eventually crossed paths with Boundless, but that's my short story.
And so when I do remember that you were born in the U.S. Your parents are immigrants. When you, as far as you can remember, were they still kind of quote unquote going through the immigration process when you were a kid? Like, do you remember them saying, "Oh, we have to go to the INS office," or filling out paperwork, or were they done with the whole thing by the time you sort of were old enough to remember?
No, funny enough, this has been a part of my family's journey from as far back as I can remember, and continues to be to this day. My parents were the first of big families to come to the U.S. And just about every year I can remember of my childhood, there was another family member being sponsored. So I saw it deeply from kind of the family-based side of the world, through my own parents' green card and citizenship journey. But I also saw my dad's a small business owner, and he runs they build medical products in a really niche space. And he has always had a hard time finding this talent in the US. And so I saw him struggle with the process from an employment-based perspective as a small business owner, trying to get talent from all over the world. And so I've always had sort of a look into both the family-based side and the employment-based side of the world. And it's been a struggle for my family on both sides.
That's fascinating. Were they dealing with any of this after you got into the immigration space? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah.
Were they still dealing with this stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, my mom held out for a long time in terms of naturalizing. Like many, was a green card holder, had a lot of feelings about becoming an American citizen. Right, I was obviously very grateful to be here, but had these strong ties back to India and her homeland, and so it was an emotional decision for her to really pursue that. And all of this was sort of unfolding as we were getting going. And sort of cutting our teeth in the industry.
And I recently learned, I mean, I don't know how much you know about this, but I recently learned that India doesn't, I don't know the details, so I hope I don't butcher this, but there isn't like a really straightforward dual citizenship thing. Do you have to give up your Indian citizenship if you become a U.S. citizen? Is that right? Or you give up something, there's like claims to land, there's some concessions you need to make if you become a dual citizen, at least in the U.S. I don't know about other countries. Is that right?
Certainly at the time that was what my mom was struggling with. I'm not up to date on all the details today, but that was the decision, and the idea of her giving up Indian citizenship was or any kinds of like ties back to India was a big deal for her. So we eventually sort of made that call, but even to this day, I mean, I still have I've cousins going through the visa stamping process that are reaching out to our team. I mean, it's so deeply embedded in sort of like the fabric of our family that it's a fun problem to tackle.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize that. A lot of folks take for granted that you just get U.S. even if you're eligible, you just get U.S. citizenship. It's a no-brainer because it's easier, because you can vote. All the benefits, and there are certainly a lot of benefits, but I think folks, first of all, a lot of people don't talk about their decision process, what they're giving up, emotionally or quite literally. And then, folks don't recognize how challenging of a decision that is. So, when I learned about that recently, it completely changed my mindset. Sometimes as an immigration practitioner, I'll say, what are you doing? You have your green card, you're eligible, file for citizenship. And it's just so much more complicated than that. So yeah, I love that. So all right, we'll take a pause here. Xiao, thank you for patiently hanging out. I wanted to kind of move to you a little bit, and you have a slightly different story, although similarly with in terms of seeing your family go through the immigration process and other family members. Can you share a little bit about sort of how immigration has been part of your personal life, and then how that transformed into what ended up becoming, Boundless?
Yeah, when I talk to more and more people in this industry, I don't think anyone just comes across it and it's like, oh, this is a fun place to be, right? People enter the immigration space because they've experienced it themselves. They've seen their close loved ones experience it. They're like something that makes it so utterly painful that they're like, wait, why can't this be better? And so for my family, right, I was born in China. My parents immigrated here when I was relatively young, and then I was able to join them later on, and we saw like watch my parents struggle through on both ends, right? How do we stay in this country, and then also how do we like get established in a way that they can work anywhere they want to work and live anywhere they want to live. And so you have millions of families just like us every year that like want to make that better life for themselves, and for and it doesn't happen. Like it's almost like there's a gate before you actually can enter this like glorious place that's the American dream, and that gate is like, oh, you have to get through this like series of of paperwork and immigration approvals. So it wasn't until I came here when I was about 3.5. My parents started being in the U.S. when I was about 1, and so it wasn't until about like 6 or 7 or so where we were actually okay. Like we can feel more comfortable like staying in this country because we finally received our green cards, and this is like during an era where the wait times weren't nearly as long as they are today.
Did you? I remember you've talked about other people in the community who were dealing with the immigration process and trying to find lawyers, and I guess coming across lawyers that were either not doing a great job or were very expensive, or both.
Yeah.
Perhaps. I mean, do you recall kind of your family working with attorneys at all, or was that just something you heard about from others?
No, we ended up spending a significant amount of our limited resources on immigration attorneys because my parents' employers refused to do it themselves, which is again like there's a whole set of things we can unravel there in time. Yeah. But yeah, like I mean, I think overall, like for a long time, right, there was just not a lot of great options, and you would just like. Yeah, and even today, we're among a lot of immigrant communities. You ask around, you're like, okay, I need help with immigration, and people either point you to, unlicensed, untrained people who've just done this within their communities. I mean, like around real estate agents, it can be like lawyers of other disciplines. I mean, like just folks that just end up doing it because they've been successful with someone else in the past, or they have to go to full service attorneys, of which it's unclear, probably leading to why Romish created his first company. It's like it's unclear who's great and like what the quality of those attorneys are, and then pricing can also be very opaque in a position where like you can't you have very little sort of agency to make any decisions otherwise.
And so was that the kind of thing where so how did this all kind of culminate into you saying, I want to try to solve this problem?
So, my background has been, mixed, where like between like, how do I run, interesting like companies and learn how to think about organizations in a new way. But also like, how do I try to solve problems that have been entrenched for a long time? So after we were able to get our green cards and later on citizenship, and I echo like what Romish said. It's like if you actually read the naturalization oath, by the way, and my parents and I like went like word by word, like you are giving up and renouncing any ties you have to your previous country, right? And like that's a big deal, right? If you want to really think about it, because it's like that has been the country that like raised you, right? Oftentimes, or like that the culture, and you're saying, actually, you know what, I am forever only loyal to America, and I think that is a barrier for folks to take that step. But yeah, as we gone through, yeah, my background is like I tried solving in the public sector, like how in the New York City Department of Education, around how we were basically 50% of our students were graduating high school. Of those, 50% were going on to some sort of higher education. And of those, 50% were graduating that institution within 6 years. So if you do the math, like and if you view some sort of advanced degree, whether it's trade or like, or bachelor's or any other kind of function, like is an ability to open up opportunities, like we're failing vast majority of the kids there. So it's like, okay, well, let's try things in a new way. Let's pay teachers $120K a year. Let's run schools 11 months out of the year because we don't need kids to go home to farms to work anymore during the summer. Right? Let's like, put different age kids in the same room because we're going by like development and not by like calendar year. How do we use technology in new ways? And so really trying to think about this problem in a new way. And then I did this in the private sector with Amazon, where the Jeff Bezos's perspective is like the majority of spend in retail still in physical space. Now, how do we do it? And if we're going to do it, how do we do it in a much better way? And so that's what we came up with, what's now called like Amazon Go or Just Walk Out technology. If any of you have been to some of these stores, or especially stadiums, it's magical, right? You just grab something and you leave, and you don't have to go check out. You don't have to wait in line, and it speeds up like the experience dramatically. But yeah, and what's interesting about immigration, as I think about it, is that like throughout my life, right, ever since my very first job, where a third of our my incoming class is like, it was a whole group of us starting at the same time in New York. A third of them didn't get their H-1Bs and had to leave the country, right? To like all the way through, like time after time, it's like immigration has been the barrier to people's lives around me and the people that in my circles. And it was around 2016 that I met someone who spent $12,000 on their immigration attorney and had a terrible experience with it. And they asked me, like, why is this so hard? And that's a really interesting question. It's so basic, but it was a way that, I'm sometimes almost like embarrassed to say, like, I never asked that question before. And I'm like, why is it so hard? And so once you get there, then I talked to hundreds of lawyers, the government officials, policy folks, families, and it's like, wait a second, like this is a a problem that can be solved, right? This is an access to information problem. This is an access to tools problem. This is and this is exactly something that technology and data can make far more available to people around the world. So that's where like we started in the B2C world as well, because it's like, hey, these are people who like need different degrees of help. Like everyone, I'll always remember the like previous ex-president of the Washington State Bar Association, and I like we're talking about this whole like mall analogy, right? Where you have different levels at the mall with different types of service and different types of experience, and instead, people were always forced to choose between no help or random help with like the person, holding a sign up, outside the mall who may or may not have any credentials, or you have to take the elevator all the way to the like premium level of the mall. And it's like, how can we service people where they're at? And so for if there are other entrepreneurs on your call or people are thinking about starting businesses, maybe you can relate to this too, Roman, is that like at some point you just learn too much about the problem. And you're like, hey, I have to solve, like, like I can't not try to solve this because it is such an incredible opportunity to help millions of people and to make such a tangible, positive impact in people's lives. That it needs to be done.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's such an entrepreneurial perspective to a problem where you see it and then you inquire And then when you know, I think when you get to a particular level of knowledge about a problem, the solution just starts to form in your head. I mean, you start putting the pieces together. And then once you see that, you become obsessed with it. And you say, like, I see the solution in here. It's not out in the world, but I see it. It's possible. And if you don't pursue it, it feels like you're letting people down. They may not even know, they don't know about you yet, but you're already letting them down if you don't pursue it. So I love that. And I like the mall analogy too, right? Because not everyone's shopping at the upper floor, right? I mean, there's space for support across the board, right? And I think that, and I say this as an immigration attorney myself, we all know that not everyone can afford an immigration attorney, but we all want people to have access to an immigration attorney. And of course, attorneys do pro bono work and all, they're nonprofits and stuff, but there's still a massively underserved community, which is why, Romish, you started in the B2C space. This was a problem. Xiao, you started and are still in the B2C space. I mean, there's so many people that do this. That means that the problem continues to exist, and people independently come to this idea that we need to combine technology with legal services to help all these people. So because, I guess you launched Boundless and you were focused on the B2C space. You've obviously stayed there overall. I mean, I know you also dabbled with TNs and other things, but I think overall the sort of branding of Boundless has been, helping individuals with green cards, fiancés, et cetera, naturalization. At what point did you guys, and then again, for everybody to color in both of your company's growth trajectories, please go back to both respective episodes. They're amazing. We just don't have the time to get into it here. But, at the point where, Romish, you started to, you kind of went to the B2B space and you expanded there and you built the business. And I've watched you over time. We've been connected for a number of years and with your CTO, Forrest. And I remember you guys did like this really nice rebrand and launched a new site and all this stuff. Like I've seen you both grow in your trajectories. At what point did this moment happen when you thought, okay, sort of like maybe there needs to be a bridge over, no pun intended, to the other side? Yeah. And I don't know how it happened. So maybe you guys can share a little bit. How did the meeting of you two come about, or, how did this sort of combination come to be?
Yeah. Happy to walk. I mean, one of the things I love to do is help fellow founders and entrepreneurs just sort of demystify like some of the things that happen behind the scenes. Everyone sees the sort of like the TechCrunch headline or the sort of the announcement, but it was a multi-year journey, frankly, to get there. And there wasn't a specific moment where Forrest and I said, okay, now it's time to sell the company. We were head down building and really loving the process. We were growing, things were starting to click. We sort of all the different parts of the business were starting to come together. And we were, head down, just focused on executing. And funny enough, it was you, Roman, that brought us together, right? Like most folks in this industry, you're the super connector. Xiao, you want to talk about like how we first intersected?
Yeah, so this will just be a plug for Roman, the brand. What's actually fascinating, so I actually went back. I was like, wait, how did I meet Roman? And I was like, oh, I met Roman because you, in 2019, you pinged my co-founder, Doug Rand, over LinkedIn. And it was just like a cold inbound. And Doug was like, I don't know this guy, but he like started a space, like a company that's like kind of adjacent in this space. And it's like, not sure if it's relevant or not, but maybe you should, have a conversation with him. Doug, who's now a senior advisor at USCIS, is a great guy. He led a lot of immigration reform under the Obama White House. And so that's how you and I got together. And then you had a panel in 2020 for AILA around, tech and innovation. And you're like, hey, why don't you should join this panel. And I was joining the panel, and then Romish was there, and he was talking about his vision, his journey, and like what they're trying to do. And I was like, wait, there's a lot of notes here that sound the same. And at that point, we had just finished our first acquisition of Rapid Visa and trying to sort of consolidate the B2C space. But you could see that all these companies were trying to go into B2B, right? Simple Citizen pivoted into B2B and then got acquired by Fragment. Envoy was B2C and then went to B2B. Legal Path was B2B. It's like, and there's this, the wonderful part about consumer is that, you can touch so many people, right? The bad part about consumer is that every month you start at zero again, right? Which is why, like, for a lot of it's why it's a lot of let's call it like family-based, immigration attorneys find it's like very challenging for them to retire, as an example, right? It's like, because you're kind of dependent on creating that demand and that cohort of customers over and over again. Whereas the beauty of B2B is that there's some sort of stability and some sort of predictability. And you can know that if you have this great relationship with the company and you can keep growing with them, that they're going to keep coming back and creating, giving them a phenomenal experience, that they'll come back. And so that's where I was clearly there's an opportunity here to continue to expand our suite of offerings, and that there's something interesting here around the selling to businesses space. So I was well, hey, Romish, you sound like you're onto something. Let's have a conversation. And so then off and on we had a conversation for the next couple of years, right? It was around us getting a B2B client and we're sending it over to them, just chatting, as Romish is much to my chagrin, he was just always just heads down on building the business. But it was during that time where where around 2020, late 2021 and early 2022 is when going into B2B became an important strategic priority for us. We discovered that a third of our consumer customers come from work-based visas, and that we at that point built the most popular website in immigration, which is great. We had millions of people coming to our site every month, and we just needed more stuff to put on the shelves because we just didn't sell much. We only had a couple of categories. And so the idea of how do we expand these categories? You mentioned we looked at, TNs, we looked at F1s, we looked at other sort of adjacencies, but it kept coming back to is we do something in this O1, EB1, NIW space, or do we do something in this true corporate side? And it was something that, I became much more interested in during the 21, 22 timeframe.
Yeah,
that's
so
great.
Go ahead, Roman. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Romish.
I was just going to add, so Xiao can be a very persistent person as well, right? It was fun looking back at some of these email exchanges, right? When you have these conversations, there's no nuanced or elegant way to hey, should we, you want to join forces, right? So it'd be sort of this flirting dating game. I feel for 18 months, just every 6 months, Xiao would reach out. Hey, how are things going? How are you thinking about growth? How are you thinking about next steps? And what impressed me throughout is we'd stay in touch, we'd compare notes. Circumstances sort of weren't right in 2021 for various reasons. We were just head down, focused on executing, and but we would compare notes and we talk about how the business was going, challenges, opportunities, things of that nature. And what continued to impress me was how Boundless was executing, right? For me, knowing how hard, and I think some of this perspective comes from the fact that Bridge was a consumer business first, and frankly, we couldn't make it work, right? We tried, customer acquisition was hard, it was a challenging thing. And so seeing Boundless continue to deliver on the things that Xiao said Boundless was going to do was interesting. I was okay, well, this team knows how to build a great product, knows how to build a great business. And so it continued to get more intriguing to just see, even though we weren't interested at the time, seeing how Boundless was executing and delighting customers. And so we kind of go into 2021. We're having on and off conversations, but nothing.
I think this is Romish's nice way of saying that. He didn't think we were very good at the time when I thought that we should join up. And so, so like I had to get a glow up, right? I had to hit the gym, had to eat right, sleep better. And then,
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole graveyard of frankly, family-based immigration startups, right? And like I've been around for long enough to be a skeptic, frankly, and so until like actually seeing Boundless execute, sort of that got me more interested. So we roll into 2022, and interestingly enough, like we started getting some inbound interest from other players in the space. Some you might expect, some you wouldn't expect, and so we start to we kind of see the Boundless interest and have those conversations, but also other players knocking on our door, and we start to have some of these introductory calls. And I'd say early 2022, we make the decision to hire an investment bank to run a more formal kind of market check. Right? I thought that with this inbound interest, it's sort of my fiduciary responsibility as our CEO to like understand what's out there, understand what the market looks like, without any real intention of selling the business necessarily, but to like evaluate opportunities, just to understand and make the right decision for the business. And so that was an interesting process, right? Because we're going and we are talking to various players to kind of supplement some of this inbound interest. We are chatting with a lot of really interesting partners, and this is kind of now like the middle of 2022. And if you can remember that far back, because so much has happened in the last 3 or 4 years with the pandemic and whatnot, sort of right dead in the middle of that process, as it's heating up, there's a lot of interest, the markets start to collapse. This is September of 2020, September of 2022. And you have Russia-Ukraine tension, you have interest rates rising, you have inflation, you have all these things that drive the like broader public markets to start collapsing, right? Down 25, 30% in a matter of months. And so all of this, all of a sudden, all these companies that we're talking to start to kind of retreat inward, right? And they're thinking about just keeping their business stabilizing their business. And so we pull the plug on that process, just thinking, look, timing's not right. We need to focus on executing our business. We're in no rush. We're profitable at that point, right? We're like, we're going to do this if and when it makes sense. And so just to kind of like the emotional toll that takes right, for all the founders, it's incredibly distracting, right? We weren't a huge team. We're trying to delight customers and build our business. And by the way, the only folks at the company that know about this at this point, because we didn't want to distract the team, are Forrest and I, right? So we're having these conversations, trying to run the business. It was a challenging and trying time, but we learned a ton about how much demand there was for what we were doing. That was really validating in some ways.
So
what's interesting is that from my end, just to like share a little, I don't think I've told you this, Romish, but yeah, like it was, we were leaning in. It's like, again, like early 22. It's like, hey, like, I think this makes sense, right? And I don't think you believe me, but like, I think this makes sense. And then you're like, oh, we're gonna go like run this process. And then it's at that point that we're like, yeah, like we're not gonna be part of this. And so this is an interesting thing as for folks who understand, like, there are, I would call it like specialized, like, investment firms, right? I'm like thinking of like like private equity and other groups that like, do deals for a living, right? We don't do deals for a living. We we help people get through the immigration process for a living. And then like the deals thing is on the side piece. And so, while it was great and that Bridge did this market check and like started talking to people, is that like, we also don't have a large team of like dedicated to this piece. And so the moment that there's like, okay, this is going to be like a big process, and everything is like, yeah, like great, like wish you all the best. Right? And I mean that genuinely. I do wish Romish all the best. I still think, I thought highly of him at the time. I was disappointed that he, didn't want to go with us. But there's also like, yeah, like, okay, there are distinct pathways around, like, when you engage a lot of people who, like, again, are professional investors and acquirers. It's a different process and a different load and a different amount of time and energy and money spent than, like, we'll call, like, more private market, like individual to individual or company to company dealings. And they're like, there's not a right or wrong answer. It's just like they're different.
Yeah. It's funny. Laborless has had a couple of these conversations as well over the past couple of years, and it was the same thing, Romish, that you're saying, that we felt we didn't really have interest in necessarily selling the business or even getting investment. We're bootstrapped and we've been profitable basically from the beginning. But we wanted to learn from the process. We wanted to know how people value us. How did they view our value versus how we view our own value? What are the things they see that we don't see, or the other way around? What do they see, and what do we think that they're missing? So, but it was very distracting. So I totally, like, you realize after the process was over, I'm like, wow, haven't done as much business development, for example, over the past 6 months as I would have, because I was so focused on this talking and, going through dollars and cents and, the back and forth and the dance, so it's really interesting to hear that. So where we've just left off is you both said, Romish, you were like, yeah, not right now. And then the market's tanked and sort of, you backed away from the whole thing. And Xiao, you were like, okay, this is not happening. But here we are in 2024 and you guys are, wearing the same t-shirt. So, So how did we go from, what was that moment where maybe you restarted, you rekindled, what was the, like, hey, how's it going text, like, you up? Like, what was that kind of rekindling of the conversation around, working together?
Yeah. The you up text was Xiao coming to San Diego at early 2023, right? So got to pull the plug on the process in the fall of 22. Maybe 6 months or so elapses. Markets start improving. Other parties that maybe retreated inward sort of came back up for air and started expressing interest again. Things are getting better. Everyone's sort of ready to be more aggressive, perhaps more acquisitive, thinking about growth. And so around that same time, Xiao reached out and was coming down to San Diego. So we grab a drink, we talk about how things are going, and around that time, things started to gel again, where it felt like the timing was right. Again, one of the things that inspired so much confidence for Forrest and I was how Boundless was executing throughout this maybe 2.5-year journey prior to that point, where we had kept tabs on how Boundless was doing. Xiao was keeping me updated, and it was incredible just the way the business was growing and how they were executing. So, Forrest and I think, frankly, like, we weren't ready to stop being part of the immigration industry. And that was really important, right? If there were other opportunities that looked like, hey, like, we're done, we're going to go, start a photo sharing app or whatever the next thing is, or be out of this industry, there might've been other opportunities that were more compelling. But what made Boundless so interesting to us is, like, we weren't done. We felt like we were in, like, the second inning of a 9-inning game. We had just gotten started. We were just getting going. Like, you start to see how much businesses needed what we were doing, right? The demand for foreign talent continues to grow. Like, the solutions just aren't meeting their need. It felt like we were so early. And so we didn't want to exit the space. We just wanted to maximize the impact we could have on that space. And so that became sort of the lens, is like, what's the opportunity, whether that's standalone or joining hands, that allows us to have the maximum impact we can have on this industry, right? And that's where Boundless started to look even more compelling, taking, like, the know-how, the resources, the team, and this incredible, like, family-based platform that Boundless had developed, and join forces to have sort of a lasting impact on the industry. So that's when things started really kind of early 2023. We kind of restart the process, if you will. And by Memorial Day, we had an LOI signed, a letter of intent signed with Boundless. And Xiao can maybe talk about the process from there and from your perspective.
Yeah. So for like I've been regularly like checking in on Romish, right, and like seeing how it's going. And one of the things I do believe is like ultimately this, probably you can apply this to a lot of relationships, but immigration, the world is small, right? Like everyone kind of knows everyone, and so like the way that you operate and the way that I like, for me, like that level of integrity and principle really matters. And so I think that this is something that is like I've really admired about the Bridge folks, right? Like, I'll even say like during the in their conversations, like there was a point where a major client of theirs mentioned that they were going to like switch to a different like law firm. This is like the first time around. This is what cemented it for me. This is like in like 2020, 2022 or something like that. And Romish called me and said, hey, like this happened. Right, this would not have shown up in the numbers for a long time. Like we could have just like gone through it and like not mentioned this at all. But like the fact that like he told me like says like so much about like the kind of person that he is, and around like, okay, there's a person that like I can trust, and I can like go on this journey for a long time with together. And so this is like I've always just wanted, like still like thought it was like a good fit. I used my kids as an excuse, went down there, like took them to SeaWorld for the first time, like, started like talking more. And, and then for those who haven't gone through this process, right? In a general sense, there's like usually companies talk, and then sometimes there's something called an IOI step, which is like an indication of interest. Like, oh, hey, we've talked. I could like this. Like, we're gonna put something down on paper. I feel like that's pretty worthless. Like in general, so like where people like get a lot, because it's like it doesn't actually mean anything, and it's just like, okay, we talked, I got some paper signed, and I'll put some numbers down that'll change by the time I actually get to know your business. And then you get to something called an LOI, and the LOI is actually pretty significant. And there's like two philosophies, because what an LOI does is it outlines basically the high level deal terms, right? The value, how it's going to be structured, what's the expectation for the next sets of like steps before it can close and be finalized, and an exclusivity period. Which means that like by the time you do an LOI and you're signing an LOI, it means that like we're gonna go, we're gonna be exclusive here. Like I'm not talking to anyone else. Like, and we're gonna see if this way. It doesn't mean that they always close. Like, but like and so who benefits from that, right? The acquirer benefits, because then like the company you're talking to can't talk to anyone else. But it's by definition non-binding, so the acquirer can walk away at any time. And so that's what I'm saying. There's like a couple of philosophies where there's some companies that will send out a bunch of LOIs very quickly. All right. So then they lock you in. You're not talking to anyone else. And then they'll go through diligence. And then maybe it'll work out. Maybe it doesn't. And like it takes a long time. But like they have all the like leverage. I think that's kind of not a great way of operating. And so for better or for worse, I go with the like, if I'm giving an LOI, unless there's like fraud committed or that something like is like grossly misrepresented, like this is happening. But what that does mean is that it takes longer for us as a company to get through an LOI. But by the time I lock you up to not be able to date anyone, I've also hopefully exhibited like enough that like you trust that we're going to get to the altar, right? If and so we've never had an LOI not close. Mm-hmm. And so that's just something, especially for your listeners, if they ever go through these kind of deal processes, really think about, is that like, is the way that the acquirer company thinks about LOIs and like what needs to get, finalized, and how confident they are that an LOI will actually get to close. So for us, like before we get an LOI, like not only have Romish and I and Forrest, we like y'all came up to Seattle. We, more of the team met each other. I got the board to approve it. I actually raised capital to make sure this happens. Like I did all of this, like we did all of this work before we actually said, okay, here's the deal. Right. And the deal isn't something that's even a surprise because it's something that, Romish and I have hashed out already for multiple months. And so by the time we got to the deal, that was like in May, we actually finished everything by the end of July. Right. And then we announced it in August. So it's actually a really quick process afterwards. But the part of that is actually due to the fact that Bridge went through the banker process before. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen from an accounting diligence perspective, especially since most businesses aren't audited at a smaller scale. Is like, how do I know that your numbers are actually real? Right. And so we hire an accounting firm to do that. And like the cleaner that your books are, to that, like the faster the process goes. The second part is, how do I know that you actually own the thing that you say you built? And so this is like, I think also where a lot of small businesses failed, is that if they don't have good counsel in the beginning, they often don't have the right level of rigor for, let's say, employment contracts. Where like everyone that you've hired needs to have in their contract that everything that they built while at your company belongs to the company and not belongs to that individual. And so, we had in our previous deal, for example, for Rapid Visa, we actually had to spend a month finding, or like the CEO of Rapid Visa had to spend a month like hunting down his early engineers to get them to actually sign this paperwork that said that all the work that they built for the company belonged to the company, or else like we weren't going to be able to buy it, because then they could just sue us saying that we're using their IP. And so there's all these like sort of like foundational pieces that if anyone is actually interested in or thinking about, selling their business, that they can, doing that stuff early will save a lot of time and money and headache down the road.
I love that. That's such an interesting tidbit, because a lot of times small businesses, the last thing they want to do is engage with counsel to like, cross their T's and dot their I's. They say, let's just get going. We'll figure all this stuff out later. But then you forget about it. It's actually, so we have a comment here from Josh Shack now. He asks, what are the key terms to discuss for a merger that are different from a sale? It's slightly different from what you just answered, but I do think some of the pieces that you just talked about kind of go to this question, just in general, key terms, right? So key terms around employment contracts and sort of ownership of the thing that you've built, especially if it's software, key terms around the financial viability, cleanliness of the books, and like honesty around the books, et cetera. I don't know if you have any other, quick kind of thoughts about merger versus a sale. I know this case, it was a sale. I suppose. But by the way, quick note, because I love how the universe works. You guys announced your merger or the acquisition on August 22nd, which is my birthday.
That was
so you always remember us. Thank you. It was for you. I mean, like chime in here. I can just go over some high level things. I mean, I think ignoring sort of the nuance, because like technically this is like it's like the forward merger, reverse merger. There's like all these like legal ways, so like an asset versus equity sales, like legal terms, right? So, but ignoring the terms, it's like really, I think what you mean, Josh, is the question is like, am I selling to, an investment firm, so like a private equity firm, or am I like joining another company? Right. Maybe that's like an easier way to think about it. And like in one case, usually like, you're basically getting capital from the investment firm, but it might be your company, it might not be your company. It depends on how much they own. You might be the CEO, you might not be the CEO, depending on what they'll decide. But it's like your entity kind of stays there and it's just getting more cash. Whereas a merger is like you're joining another entity. It's like I'm sort of using the colloquial terms. But like the things to consider, right? So if I go down like, what like elements of a term sheet or an LOI, it's like, okay, first it's like obviously like how much is it going to be, right? And in what forms? How much of it is cash? How much of it is equity? How much of it is debt? How much is something else? How is that actually paid out and when? Right? Like, is it all up front? Is it over time? Are there specific milestones that you need to hit to open up these things over time? Are all like definitely pieces to negotiate. How much of the deal is held back? Think of it as like an escrow kind of situation. Or like, what if something goes wrong? What if like something, you represented something that wasn't true? Like, how much of it is sort of protection for the buyer about your business, and like for how long is it held in this like escrow account? Who are the important employees that come over, right? And what are the agreements with them? Like, I do think that like, even so, like, both Romish and Forrest are like great members of Boundless, like executive team, but their roles have changed a lot in this last year, right? And so like, how do you structure it in a way that like makes people feel good about the future, but also like allows for like flexibility because the companies can be different? How do you think about like non-competes, right? Like, so especially in this space, like if you sell, are you able to do something in immigration again? For how long? And those are like going to be important like things to like think about. And then like, I think those are some of the like the major pieces around like this, around like general high level like terms. Romish, is there anything else that you were thinking about that we discussed that I missed?
No, I think you hit on the big ones, right? I think the key is thinking about this as you're getting married and you got to live with this person for a long time. And so I think folks tend to get maybe caught up in some of the upfront headline, concepts or terms, and you realize that all the details matter in terms of the sort of the long-term journey that you're going on with this company. So happy to Josh to separately get into more of the details, but I think those are the big headlines.
We have another.
Sorry, there's two other things that I thought about that are important. As like similar to the marriage, it's like this is actually you're negotiating a prenup, right? And so there's two parts. I've never done a prenup, right? But I know people who have, and it kind of sucks. Right? No one's happy about negotiating a prenup because you're like, wait, I thought we're gonna like spend the rest of our lives together and this is gonna be great, and then you're like, but what if like it kind of doesn't happen, right? And so two things come out of that. One is like it's a huge like it's a huge sliding scale around trust around this part, right? Like how much of it is like just like trust me, you'll be taken care of, and how much of it do I need like clarity written in of like if this doesn't work out, what happens? Right. And then the second part of it is that when I tell other companies that we're talking to about potentially acquiring, is that just know that everyone's going to be really unhappy right before close. I've never been part of a deal where like people are happy, because it's just like you go into this when you sign an LOI, you're like happy, right? Great, like we got this like high level thing, we're good, we're ready to go, and then all the details and all this like elements of like this prenup and then happens, and like both sides have lawyers telling them that like, oh, you're doing it wrong, and like ultimately it does come to usually a founder to founder kind of like situation and conversations to get through some of these roadblocks, but no one's gonna be happy about it. And you just have to mentally prepare yourself to be like really upset about everything.
It's compromise, right? I mean, you're coming to compromises consistently, which means that nobody's going to be the clear winner, but the hope is that together you will do something that's sustainable for the long term.
Yeah. But like, and then once you're actually together again, great. Like it's like you have to be able to it's sort of like negotiating a job offer in some ways, right? Like this is like a little bit obviously more complex, but it's like at the point of negotiate, if you're really negotiating hard a job offer, like when like there's often times where like the two sides aren't going to feel too great about it, and then you have to be able to be like, okay, that was just capsuled and like saran wrapped in the era of negotiation. Now that you're here, everyone's happy. We never talk about that again.
Yeah. I know we have just a few more minutes, so there are a couple more questions, and I love this. I knew this was going to be so engaging. If we can get to we have two more questions, but I want to jump first into like the final sort of thing. If you guys can, in 3 minutes, what do you guys see as the future of Boundless? So number one, you have this combination of the B2C, B2B space, and then number two, I know you're expanding by partnering with law firms. Because you guys are part of the Utah Sandbox, et cetera. I know that's a lot. I know we can't fit all of it in the next 5 minutes, but if you could just give a quick taste of what you're seeing for the future, and hey, maybe we can have another episode with one or both of you guys back on the show. But what are your thoughts on sort of the future for the business?
Romish,
you want to kick off, and then I could talk a little bit more on the back of your comments.
Ultimately, we want to be the default choice for immigration. Right? And we think we've put together the right combination of, phenomenal lawyer expertise with great technology, with incredible design and CX, and a service level that when I think about it, it's sort of like online tax prep in the early mid 90s, or online travel in the mid to late 90s. There was a period of time where doing something doing something online felt like a risk and something different. And we're here to try to show that this is not only just as good, but better in a lot of different ways, right? You'll get same level of legal strategy and support. You'll get improved sort of UX and streamline. You get to do it on your own time. You get all you get access to data and reporting and seamless. And then obviously the hype of the year is around AI and personalization. The idea is that we can be the new way of doing immigration, and that's what's super exciting. And so this is also why we're talking to a lot of other companies, right? And around hey, how can who wants to be on this train with us, right? And that includes law firms, and how can we bring you onto our platform, right? And be able to have you part of this journey with us, as well as companies that are trying to solve different niches, different geos, different categories, different segments. So I'm really excited to whatever it is, 2 years from now, bring on all the different brands and organizations and lawyers and firms that we have incorporated into this Boundless umbrella.
Yeah, the one thing I'd just add there is, right, I think in terms of bringing employment-based and family-based together, I haven't talked to a single customer. I've talked to hundreds, maybe thousands of our customers over time that has referred to things as family-based or employment-based immigration, right? That's inside baseball, right? That's what the three of us and our practitioner friends will use. The way, and just kind of bring this full circle back to our original founding stories, our families have been through both employment-based and family-based immigration. My parents, my dad started, as an F1 and an H1B, and then became family-based, and then went back to employment-based, right? Immigration is just immigration to customers and to people going through this. And so what I love about the opportunity here is how we can stitch that together in a way that allows us to support the entire immigrant journey, right? And that doesn't matter if it's family-based or employment-based. Boundless is here to serve you. And in my view, that's the future, right? People want an immigration solution and a partner that can support them through the entire journey. And we hope to be that first call.
I love that. And it's funny how you say it, that employment-based and family-based, you're absolutely right. It's an insider term, and clients don't, often don't know the difference. I have the last question. I did want to get to this. I know we're on the hour, because you talked about, there is this future and even current state where you're bringing law firms into the fold, right? So not, as far as I understand, not just kind of as a contract partner, but with the way laws are hopefully going to be changing in the US, perhaps they can be part of the organization, right? So you're serving them with a Boundless attorney. So, Ron Matten, who's a fellow friend and legal tech person, asked about legal fees. What are the legal fees? Like, are they significantly different from a law firm? Are there instances where they're much lower versus the same? Like, what are some of your thoughts about, fees in terms of working with a tech company, tech first company versus like a more traditional law firm?
I think I bring this back to the mall analogy that Xiao was describing, right? In our view, there are different customers that need different things and are looking for different solutions. And so it's our job to not sort of fit a square peg into a round hole, but to meet the customer where they are. And so for business customers, it's very clear that our business clients want a full service, high touch, sort of white glove service, right? And so the goal is not, and we're not competing on price there. We want to provide a superior solution, one that saves employers time, provides a delightful experience for their employees, gives them the strategic guidance, not just the transactional guidance they're looking for. Whereas on the consumer side, there's different types of consumers. It's not a one size fits all solution. And so we've approached this in terms of understanding customer needs and trying to design solutions. And that includes price points, right? And so there are full service sort of white glove solutions. There are solutions that are a hybrid where a customer may want to carry more of the load of the process on their end, and we support them in very specific ways. And so I think ultimately that's in our view, where the market is going, where different consumer groups are going to have different needs. And our job is to design solutions that meet them where they are.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. I appreciate that. Guys, I know we're a few minutes over your hour. I appreciate you both so much. This was such a fascinating conversation, such a compelling story. And frankly, even for me, I learned so much just about the process, right? It's my first rodeo building a business, and learning and hearing from people, folks like you who have been through it is really great. We have at least one more question in the comments. I'm not going to bring it up, but I hope that folks maybe reach out to you, or you guys come back in the comments and provide some information. I think there's a lot of lack of information around this process. So I appreciate you both. Thank you for being here. And I'm super excited to follow the continuing journey of Boundless. And I hope to have you back on the show to talk about more things that you're working on at some point, and delight us with more knowledge. So thank you both. I appreciate it.
Same. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Roman.
Oh, thanks everybody. What a great show. I was so enthralled by the episode that I forgot to thank our second sponsor. So I'm going to do a quick thank you to DocketWise, who is, not only a leading technology company, but one of they actually started as a B2C immigration company too, back in the day. And I think it's really important to state how many people in the immigration tech industry start off by saying, I want to solve this immigration problem for individuals. So DocketWise originally did start as a company called BorderWise, which was, was aiming to help individuals with the immigration process. Today, DocketWise is a leading immigration case management software. They work with immigration law firms all across the country, helping them with providing best-in-class immigration forms, customizable questionnaires, a lot of industry-leading integrations, including with Laborless, for any DocketWise users that have H-1B clients. They provide great customer service. Tons of Q&As on their website too. One of the things I really love about DocketWise is that they actually invest a lot of time and energy into creating value and content for the industry too. They have a great blog. They have a podcast. They have ebooks that help immigration lawyers with everything from technology to marketing. They sponsor this show and make this available. So I really appreciate them. So if you're interested, check out DocketWise. There's a link to them on the show notes here, or if not, just reach out to them at docketwise.com and tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket show. Thank you also once again to Lex Reception for being the main sponsor of this episode. I gave you the spiel in the beginning, but if you're an immigration law firm that's interested in getting support for your intake, so accepting client phone calls and emails, and sort of online inquiries and reaching out to them. Really a full-on reception service that's 24/7, right? So overnight, weekends, holidays, if you're off and you don't get a chance to respond to a last-minute inquiry from a client, Lex Reception is there to respond to them and help them, or maybe sign them on as a client. So check them out. They're also they integrate with a number of platforms, including LawPay, which, by the way, is part of the DocketWise family of tech companies. So a lot of synergies here within the industry. Check out Lex Reception. They're offering $250 off your first month of service if you use the link in the show notes, or if you reach out to them and tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. So with that, thank you all so much. Josh, thank you so much for the comment about this being really interesting. And Ron, thank you as well. Ian, I saw your last question. I hope that they can answer it. It's a really great question. I hope they can answer it in the comments. But thank you all so much for being here. See you next week for next week's episode. And in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Peace out, guys.